Hello, piccolo players. I'm going to go over the piccolo part and flute 2 part to Hinastera's concert variations. I just played this last weekend with Hawaii Symphony, and I'm just going to mention maybe a few things I did, some tips, advice, or what I was thinking about, or how I practice some of the variations. So I'm just going to go through these movements. The first movement is a big cello feature. Note that each movement attacas to the next one. So you need to be aware of that. So at the end of this first movement, you see attacca there in the music. You don't need to count all these rests, but just know that when the cello player gets to a very extreme high note, that's when it's time to start waking up and pay attention. And that's at the end of the first movement. And then the violins will come in movement 2. In movement 2, even though it's a very kind of boring and slow movement and just an interlude, you do need to be counting here because it attacas right into movement 3, and that's your first entrance, and it's exposed, so you need to be there. In movement 3, that's the big flute variation. It's got a huge flute solo. I would just mention that watch those B's that have the fermata. You're in unison with the flute. It's really easy for that B to just like go off and be wild away from you. So yada da da da. I would practice with the tuner on and see where your B happens to land when you get there naturally. So just keep it yada da 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 as straightforward as possible and tune to the principal flute. Just practice keeping it all even. Yada da da da, not yada da da. And let your B fly away from you. The rest of the movement's easy for you. The flute player's got a lot to do. When you get to the end of this movement, it attacas again right into movement 4. Just watch because the tempo is printed to be the same. Movement 3 is at 132, and it's usually played around there. And then movement 4 is supposed to attaca being the same tempo, 132. For the dotted quarter note, but it never is. It's always a little bit slower. This is a very difficult variation for the clarinet. So usually that last measure before the start of the 4th variation is in the tempo of 1 2 1 2 yada da 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 da, and then it's a completely different tempo at the start of movement 4. So just really watch the conductor there, and that's it for that measure. Movement 5, nothing. Movement 6, nothing. Take a little nap. Movement 7. When you get to movement 7, it's very straightforward. I would just advise to not even worry about those 30 seconds. I remember drilling them and trying to get the exact notes at the end of movement 7 years ago, decades ago even, and it's not worth it. No one's going to hear you, and you can't even hear yourself. So what I did, what I've done in recent years, is I finger the low D and just overblow, and I hit some things. I'm not even really sure because I can't hear myself. But right there, which is after 48, well, I'll just play from 48. Something like that. So I'm just leaving the D down, and just trying to get the effect. It's just an effect. So don't worry about trying to drill that to get it perfect. Okay, that's that. When you get to the next variation, the violin variation, number 8, this is where you're switching to flute 2. It looks very easy, and it is, but just be aware that when you get to rehearsal 53, make sure you are watching the conductor like a hawk, because right there, it's just the concertmaster playing, and it can be a little free, cadenza-like. You can easily lose track of counting your rests if you're not watching the conductor. So the conductor usually just gives like an opera downbeat. So just watch, because when you come in at measure or rehearsal 54, it is a flute 2 solo. You are the only thing that happens right there. And then in movement 9, this one's the horn variation. You have that little piccolo thing at the end. This is a typical, piccolo phrase that looks like nothing, but as us piccolo players know, we just think, oh God, intonation, it's very difficult. I would just say, don't play too soft. It needs to speak. When you do come in so that the conductor can hear your low G. So to give him, like the piccolo player came in. One thing I found myself doing in this last performance, that I did this past weekend on this piece is for the A, I put the pinky down. I try not to do that too often. It's kind of a crutch, so just a little bit out of shape right now. But G, D, and then A, you just have to be careful not to put the G key down. That'll lift the A pitch up a little bit. Play this through with a tuner, see where your notes lie, but probably the G, the first G, just make sure it speaks. I think that's the most important thing. The D is likely to be sharp, and then the A is likely to be flat. So of course that causes the whole line to sound not great. But you want something like, and I usually like to do a lot of, or some vibrato on held notes on piccolo. This one, in this case, I would keep it straight because I think you're with the horn, probably the horn or a clarinet maybe, but an instrument that doesn't do vibrato. And so you'll be holding a chord with that instrument. So if you're doing vibrato and the horn is not, it just draws too much attention to yourself, and you're just supposed to be inserting a note in the chord, like a color sound. So I would do that, and then you fade away. Okay, and then you don't have anything until measure 12, the finale. I would note though the movement before, that's the bass solo, movement 10 or variation 10. It's nothing, but I would recommend that you turn your page at the start of that variation because it's very, very soft, and you're just going to draw attention to yourself turning your page at like rehearsal 67 or something. Don't do that. You'll definitely know when movement 12 starts because it's an up tempo and you have the cues in your music there. At the start of movement 12, it'll be very obvious. I would recommend take a good breath. You need to make all the way through in one breath. There's spots that you can breathe, but generally you're trying to get through there all in one breath. It doesn't need to be loud. Again, you're a color that should fit in with the clarinet. You're in unison with the clarinet. So don't be too wild sounding. And again, you have these B's. So when you get to the end of this phrase in the third line, you're holding a B. Just make sure that B arrives on a B and not a B plus. When you get down to rehearsal 71, you have those G sharp trills that run up to it. I found if I just left out the first B, that it was just more doable and it sounded better. You need that, but if you have the B, to me it's like, it started getting into beat 3 of the rest. And it just needs to have the effect. So that's what I did. You could try that. You could even leave out the C sharp as well and just do D, E, F sharp, G sharp. So you could just do, and that'll, you just need that run. But I added the C sharp, so after rehearsal 75, you have those what I did, and you can just do it as written for the effect, but I just took out the first grace note instead, so I did that. I think it's fine. Otherwise, it's, and I don't know, you don't have time for that. And then speaking of taking notes out, at the last page of this, you have those big octaves. What I did to make it a little bit more playable was the first run up to the high B, I left out the drop to the B, the bottom B. So in slow motion I did, and I did all that. But the first one, for me, I found as I was practicing, if I tried to do, I could never get it really going. So I just did. Then it was playable for me. So you gotta make it playable for you. I think that is generally a very good rule of thumb for playing piccolo. If it doesn't ruin the music, as it's intended, alter it a tiny bit and to make it playable, save yourself. Okay, so I think that those are just the main things I did that might be helpful. Like any piece almost, the best way to practice it after you've gone through and worked out some of the measures, the technical parts of it, is to put on a recording and play along, especially the movements that have the mixed meter or where it's changing the groupings of 6 or 3. So you get a feel for how your part fits in there. The best recordings that when I just go on YouTube and put in this piece, the best ones I found that I actually played along with, I played along with the Boston Symphony that you see here, but also the LA fill right underneath is also excellent. It's always good to play along with a recording so you can practice counting your rests and practice coming in and just practicing the feel of how everything feels, and then you'll be completely confident for the first rehearsal. Okay, I hope you found some of that stuff useful. I'm going to, every time I play something in an orchestra, I'm going to, if it has a significant piccolo part, I'm going to do a little, study guide on it, on what I did, to see if any of it might be helpful for somebody else. So if you found this helpful, make sure you hit subscribe so you can stay in the loop for future videos like this one. Feel free to leave any comments. If you want me to cover a piece specifically, I'd be happy to do that and give any tips that I can that might be helpful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you at the next video.